So let's go over to monism. There's only one basis for both mind and body. Now, if you say it like this, there's only one basis for both mind and body, then you have two possibilities really, right? The one basis can be material, then you have materialism, or it can be mental. You could in principle say there are only thoughts, there is no body. Again, this is not very plausible to anybody but a philosopher, but from purely philosophical perspective, you could say this. It might be, for example, that this whole existence is just a dream. I am dreaming you. I am dreaming this camera. I am dreaming this microphone. I am dreaming that I'm sitting here right now. All this does not exist. There is in reality only one brain, which is my brain. No, there's not even a brain. There's only one thought. There is one source of thought. Let's say something like an immaterial thinking thing, God. And this one thought creates the world as a product of its imagination. There's one long dream. And this one long dream is everything we see. Now, possible, logically, yeah, okay, we have all had dreams, very lively dreams sometimes, nightmares are often very lively. You think they're true the moment you dream them. It might be that all this is just a dream, right? You cannot exclude the possibility, but again, it's not very plausible, right? And there are various problems with it. For example, if this is all a dream, and I have created all these things, for example, these papers behind me, if I am the dreamer and I have dreamt up all these papers behind me, then why I don't know exactly what is on these papers without reading them? Then I should now be, if this all is in my mind, I should now know what is there on the board. I wouldn't have to stick it to the board because I would know this information anyway. But I don't know it. If I go around now and look what's on the board, I will be surprised about some of these papers, which I've stuck there for years sometimes and not looked again at. So if this was all my creation, then I should know what is on these papers. On the other hand, I had another point there, but I forgot it now. Okay, anyway, so this is not very plausible, right? Now, if I'm talking about materialism now, let's take the other thing. There is only the material world. Then I have these two possibilities. I can say, with the identity theory, mental states are brain states. So mental states exist. If I say, I hope, I fear, this is a state that exists, but it is in reality a physical state, a brain state. Or I could be an eliminative materialist. I could say there are no mental states. All talk of mental states is misleading and wrong and talking about something that does not exist. So an eliminative materialist would say there is no fear. This is just a total misunderstanding. Instead of fear, we should say there is only a faster heartbeat, running away, screaming. If you have faster heartbeat, running away, screaming, and perhaps, 50,000 other physiological reactions, then this is what people mean by saying fear, but we shouldn't use the word fear, because these expressions of fear also are different from people to person, right? Some people express their fear in more screaming, some people express it in less screaming. Perhaps some people are terrified and completely lose their voice. They don't scream at all. Or perhaps some people have a much higher heartbeat, much faster heartbeat when they are afraid. Other people don't have a faster heartbeat when they are afraid. So therefore, fear is even misleading, because fear does not describe one thing. Fear seems to describe something, but in reality, when you look closer, it does not describe anything particular. It's a combination of different things that sometimes are there and sometimes are not there. And so it's even misleading to say that there is a thing called fear. And the same of every mental state. Perhaps there is no one thing called hope, or one thing called belief. Perhaps these are all so different bodily conditions that I should instead be describing classes of condition instead of mental states. So if I talk about the identity theory, we will just look at this a little closer, because this is one of the most commonly, especially by natural scientists, biologists and so on, find this the most plausible theory. Mental states are brain states. So reductive materialism means that I explain a higher level phenomenon completely in terms of a lower level phenomenon. The higher level concept can be completely reduced to a lower level concept. What does this mean? For example, heat is identical to the mean kinetic energy of molecules. So when I say the coffee here is hot, I am not saying that it has any property of hotness that is in any kind magical or unphysical or unmaterial. It is just a way of speaking that in reality can be reduced to saying that the molecules of this coffee move around at a higher speed, they have more kinetic energy, and this makes the coffee feel hot. Later the molecules slow down and the coffee becomes cold. So I could just stop talking about cold and hot coffee. I could instead talk about fast and slow molecules. And I would be saying the same thing. I wouldn't lose anything in my description of the world. The coffee would still feel, hot or cold, and its molecules would be fast or slow. I don't need two descriptions. I can reduce the hotness description to the molecule speed description without any loss. So actually, describing mental states as mental states is just redundant. This is a kind of description that we don't need, in the same way like we don't need to talk about hotness. Sounds is identical to waves of different air density, right? Sound is just waves going off from this point, reaching my ears, moving my, these drums inside my ear. And these again produce, electrical signals that go to my brain. So I don't need to actually speak of sound. I don't need to use the word sound. I could speak of air waves, and this would be the same thing. So every talk about sound can be reduced to a talk about air waves without loss of information. And wherever I say sound, I can say air waves, and I can explain all properties of sounds by the property of air waves. And so sound is just a word that is not needed. It's redundant. In the same way, mental states are words that are not needed, that are redundant. I can describe them as identical to brain states. Okay, so the lower level concepts, the same with color, right, completely explain the higher level concept and can fully replace it. The higher level concept is just an abbreviated way of speaking about the lower level concept. Now, I think we should stop. Perhaps no, we will not stop. We will continue here and finish the identity theory. Okay, so there are arguments to support reductive materialism. One supporting argument is that we can see nowadays with technology, we can see the brain at work. And when I see my brain at work with some visualization technology, for example, MRI is the thing where you scan the brain. They do it, in medicine to scan for tumors and so on. But what you can see is how the brain works. So you can put some kind of radioactive substance in your blood. You drink something and this goes through your blood into your brain, and then you can, as the brain works, you can see where more sugar is used by the brain. Then this produces a bigger, flash of light on this instrument, on this map of your brain, and then you can see where in your brain is used more sugar, where your brain is working more and where your brain is working less. And these visualizations of the working brain correlate well with mental states. So when I'm happy, particular areas of my brain show some activity. When I'm frightened or sad, other areas light up. The correlation is strong and consistent. The same with electrical measurements of the brain waves and different states, for example, dreaming or being awake, produce different electrical configurations for the brain that we can measure as electricity, right? This is a support for the identity theory, because if I have these mental states and I also always can measure the same physical state, this supports the theory that the mental state is just identical to a physical state. You can also reverse the effect. Damage in particular areas of the brain causes corresponding functions to be lost. We know this from accidents, right? People have had their brains pierced at various points, and the doctors have been able to identify particular centers in the brain that do particular things. So whenever you have a damage at a particular place in the brain, you find the same kind of impairment of cognitive function that is associated with this part of the brain, right? So this is easy to see the correlation between these things. The opposite also, stimulation of particular brain areas can cause mental states to appear. So people have, for example, you can open the brain, you can stimulate particular points in the brain, and then the person will perceive, you can do this while somebody is awake because the brain inside doesn't feel pain. And so people will perceive, light flashes or sounds or smells from the activation of particular parts of the brain. So again, it seems like these mental states are created by the brain. They are identical to the brain. Of course, there are counter-arguments. No two people have the same brain is a counter-argument, right? Brains develop differently in different individuals, yet we all think that we have the same mental states. So if you think about it, if really the mental state was identical to a particular brain state, then the mental state, let's say, of fear would be a particular configuration of the brain. But now we all have different brains. No two people have the same brain. If we cut our brains open and we look at how they are wired, they're all different. It depends on how you were raised when you were a child, how much you played with your toys, manual toys, for example, finger movements in a baby influence the way brain connections develop, how much TV you were watching as a child, right? And in all kinds of stimulation you had produce different patterns of brain connections. Also, we know that there is some genetic component to this. Some kinds of genes produce brains that are more or less, wired in particular ways. We know that women have different brains from men in some respects. Some parts of the brain are wired differently in women than in men. And so if this is all the case, then how can I say that fear is identical to a particular brain state? Then there is no identical brain state between us because we have different brains. And if this is the case, how can I say that we both feel fear? Then we cannot both feel fear. Then I have a fear, you have perhaps a fear, but it's a different fear. Then we wouldn't be able to identify mental states, and this would be strange. Because we generally say, if you are afraid, press this button. We think that this instruction makes some sense. If you are afraid, press the button. Somebody will come and assist you. If there is no such thing as fear, one fear, then how can I say if you are afraid, press the button? It's impossible, because there is no thing like being afraid in general. My being afraid, Andy's afraid, is a totally different state from Jane's being afraid. So therefore, how can I say? Do you love me? The question, do you love me? Do you love me means, do you have a mental state of love that is similar to the mental state of love I have when I am in love? But if your mental state of love necessarily, because your brain is different, is a different state of love from my state of love, how can I even say that I love you and this makes any sense? Or do you love me makes any sense? Because your loving is a different mental state from my loving. They are not comparable at all in this theory, right? But we don't believe this. We don't think that your mental state of love is different from my mental state of love. They should be comparable, right? And even more different, of course, are brains of other species, dogs and cats and birds. And we still would want to maintain that cats or birds can be afraid. Perhaps not birds, but cats clearly can be afraid, or dogs. How can this be if my fear was identical to a particular physical state of my brain? Subjective experience indicates that we indeed do have mental states, and they don't feel like they are only states of our brains. Here is now a last argument against the identity theory of mind. It comes from Daniel Dennett, who is a famous philosopher of mind, and he describes a thought experiment where you imagine that you have taken your brain out from your skull, and it has been placed in a kind of aquarium, in a vat, and in there it survives, it's alive, it's just separate from your body, and it is connected via wireless signals to your body, so all the nerves are connected. Your brain can control your body normally as if it was in your head, but it's not there anymore. But everything works otherwise, right? And now you go and you confront your brain that is in this box, in this tank. You go there, you walk over, your body walks over to your brain, sitting there in its box full of machinery to keep it alive, and your body looks at it. Will you have the sense of looking at yourself in any way? And now the intuition is, will you or will you not think when you see this brain that this is yourself? The intuition is that you will not. You will see this thing there, and you will say, this is my brain. You will not say, somebody is looking at me. Right? It would be very strange if you said the correct thing would, if you identify with your brain, correct thing would be to say somebody is looking at me. But you will say, I see my brain over there. So I am here, right? You would perceive yourself as the thing that is behind your eyes. You perceive yourself as being behind your eyes, behind your senses. So, but anyway, whatever this is supposed to prove, this is not a particularly good argument. And many of the arguments we had previously are similar, right? These are arguments from introspection, where you would say, I judge the truth of a claim depending on how it feels to me from the inside, whether this is true or not. And these are all weak arguments, right? There is some, they're not fallacies, they're not completely broken, but they're weak arguments, because introspection is particularly bad at revealing information about your body, right? Just looking into yourself and how your body feels gives you relatively bad information about your body. For example, blood circulation is going on everywhere in your body. You don't feel any of it. And for many centuries, since, ancient Greeks were so clever about all kinds of things, they didn't have the slightest idea about blood circulation. So all these thousands and thousands of Greek philosophers, they all had blood circulating in their bodies all day. None of them ever felt enough of that to produce a theory of blood circulation. We don't have any introspection about how our digestion works, right? You have some feeling when food goes in, you have some feeling when it goes out again on the other end, but that's it, right? Whatever happens in between, if you are ill, if you have a food poisoning, perhaps then you have some pain in your belly, but otherwise digestion is just totally transparent. It doesn't give you any feeling. And this is why we are often mistaken about what foods are good for us or what foods are bad for us. We like to stuff ourselves with chocolate cookies because they feel pleasant. But if we were better connected to how our body works, we would actually perceive that they are harmful, right? So introspection is a weak argument. Identity theory part, and then next time we will talk about eliminative materialism. Thank you.